Welcome. LWV Rochester welcomes you to our continuing presentations on redistricting. Tonight's presentation is entitled Redistricting Again, How Will It Work in Rochester, Olmsted County this time? My name is Anna Froling. I'm president of LWV Rochester, and I will be moderating this evening's discussion. LWV is a volunteer organization organized at the state, local, and national level to encourage citizens to vote and to participate in government. I want to thank for organizing this event, and I also want to thank our co-sponsors of this event, Rochester Public Library, Rochester Area Chamber of Commerce, IMAA, NAACP, and the Diversity Council. Redistricting affects who you will vote for in the next election. After every census, each unit of government needs to evaluate the population changes in its local city wards, in its county commissioner districts, and its state and federal legislative districts to make the population in each approximately the same. These boundary changes can have a wide-reaching implications for citizens. Our program will focus on Rochester city wards and Olmsted County commission districts and townships in small cities. Our program will focus on Rochester city wards, as I said, and our first speaker will be Paul Huffman. He's the Voter Service Co-Chair and on the State League of Women Voters Board of Directors. And he'll give us an overview of the state and how the local is involved with that. Heather Heyer is a management analyst, City of Rochester, and Ben Griffith, Olmsted County Planning Director. So I'm going to give a few Zoom instructions, housekeeping instructions first. I know a lot of you have been on these events. This Zoom event is being recorded and will be posted on our LWV Facebook page and website. Everyone was admitted with your cameras off and the microphone muted. We encourage you to turn your cameras on if you feel comfortable doing so. Audience microphones will remain muted. We ask you to open the chat box for additional information on redistricting as well as other useful links. It's the green, and the chat box is the green icon on the bottom of the screen. Questions. We will welcome questions. We encourage questions. Please enter your questions through the Zoom chat box. LWV members will be monitoring questions and passing them on to me to ask during the last part of the program. We also have received some questions beforehand from the co-sponsors of this event. So we're going to get started with Paul Huffman. As I said, he's going to go over a short overview of the statewide redistricting process, including some of the rules and dates. Then we'll hear from Heather Heyer for Rochester and Ben Griffith for Olmsted County. So we'll get started. I'm going to turn it over to Paul Huffman to get us started with statewide information and the rules and dates. And thank you, Paul, for coming this evening and giving us some information.
Great, thank you, Anna. Thank you for this opportunity to be here and talk about redistricting. And I really appreciate Ben and Heather being here from Olmsted County and the city of Rochester. It's great when the local government will, help the public understand the process and their opportunities for participation. And I think what I've seen with regards to their efforts is a great step in helping that. So my first thing I'm going to talk about is going to be about just a brief overview of redistricting. First thing I want to talk about is that the League of Women Voters, Anna gave you some great information about who we are as the League of Women Voters, but I want to emphasize that we are a nonpartisan organization. We don't support any candidate or political party at any level of government, but we are always working on vital issues of concern of members in the public. We are principled, but we are not partisan. And so, the nature of redistricting at every level is a political process. It occurs within the elected bodies, predominantly by elected officials making policy decisions. So that's by its nature a political process. And we do have perspective and interest in helping the public engage in that in a way that helps ensure the interests of the public are represented. So briefly, for those who have not been exposed, members of the public, to redistricting and what it is, at every level of government, just about, our representation is divided into geographic areas. So you see this a map of the state of Minnesota. On the left, you see our 8 congressional districts, for our representation in Congress. On the right, you see that is a map of House districts in Minnesota, 134 House districts, 67 Senate districts. Then your counties, 7 commissioner districts in Olmsted County, by which you elect your representatives for the county government. And then wards in the city of Rochester, 6 wards in the city of Rochester, and that's how those wards are aligned. And so how those lines are drawn can determine how your voices are being heard and what policies are made based on the accountability and representation of the public. So what is redistricting, which is the topic here? So after every census, every 10 years, which we completed really late last year, was the counting done. Early this year was when the counts got released, with the most recent deadline being August, is when all that detailed information that was gathered by the Census Bureau is released. And then the congressional seats across the country are assigned, and that's called apportionment. So back in April of this year, we found out how many people every state had, and based on that, how many representatives they had in Congress. And that's where we found out that by 29 people, Minnesota kept our 8 congressional seats. So that was great. Once that is done, and once the data is provided to the states by the Census Bureau, the states then divide up the lines for the congressional districts, and then the House and Senate districts within the state of Minnesota. So that's what we are currently, embarked on right now, is doing that detailed line drawing. At the same time, it is drawing lines for local districts, those counties, those cities that have wards, some school districts, park boards in some places, and where there are elected officials by geographic area to provide that representation. One of the things that's important to know is every state determines its own process. In Minnesota, there's very limited legal guidance on how that's done, really to ensure that there is adherence to some numerical and geographic principles, equal population to varying degrees, and adherence to precinct boundaries for legislative congressional districts. Drawing a map, just briefly, there's lots of ways to draw maps that are legal, where they meet those limited legal requirements. And you could have what you see here is a representation of, you've got, 50 precincts. You're going to divide them into 5 districts. If you divided it to where each of those groups, the yellow group and the green group, were equally represented, you'd have 3 green districts and 2 yellow districts. But yet you can draw those maps in a way that green gets every district, and therefore there is no voice represented of that yellow group. Or you can draw a map in such a way that the minority group, in that case, the yellow, even though they're only 40% of the population, they get 60% of the representation. Okay, they are overrepresented. So that says that how those lines are drawn and what communities are then represented is very important to how policies are made, resources are allocated. And so we want to think about, redistricting being about community representation. We think especially cities and counties, those are nonpartisan elections, but it isn't, it does have regard for policy and what policies are important to people and what voices are being heard. So you think about, making sure that those elected individuals have heard your voices about what is important and how you want to be represented. Because if there are groups or community voices that are diluted, they're dispersed between other areas, then those voices are not going to be heard. They're going to be drowned out by other voices. Or if you're isolated, okay, like in that example where we had, the group that may have had the majority interest, but yet they were put in a position where their voices were isolated, they are not getting adequate representation. So that's where this becomes about policy interests rather than party. And so that's, regardless of what party represents you, if the people with those shared policy interests are being effectively represented, then there will be accountability at the ballot box, and there will be responsiveness to the electorate. How redistricting is done. 3 things we think about with this is, and if you're in business, this is very familiar to you from a business process standpoint: people, principles, process. Who does the work? Who draws the maps? Makes the decision. In Minnesota, by and large, and this is how it works in Olmsted County and in the city of Rochester, it's the elected officials who draw the maps and make the decisions. They have staff that supports them in this, naturally, but ultimately those decisions get made by elected officials who are actually the beneficiaries of those maps. The principles, that's the rules they follow in order to draw the maps. And as I said, in Minnesota, there's very limited legal requirements around those maps that are being drawn. They're very important from the standpoint of equalizing population, from adhering to precinct boundaries, but at the same time, they're pretty limited. And as I said, you could draw a lot of maps that are legal that have very big differences in representation. And finally, the process. How are the maps drawn? What is the opportunity for public input, for public review and comment, and then for public challenge on maps? What is the transparency in that process? That is very important also from the standpoint of how this is done, the responsiveness to the public and our communities being represented. And at a high level, Minnesota is one of the weakest states in the country for transparency and public involvement. 28 states have requirements in law for public input, public review, public challenge of redistricting maps. That is an area that we could do better in Minnesota. So that's what I have for you as an overview. I'm going to turn it back to Anna and for the local governments, the city and the county, to give you their explanations. Thank you, Anna.
Ooh, I got muted. Thanks, Paul, for that. Now I'm going to turn it over to Heather Heyer. She will discuss the census effects on Rochester City wards. Heather?
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here. And thank you, Paul, for your wonderful overview. I am going to share my screen here and we will get started. All right. So I wanted to just share quickly kind of our timeline we have in Rochester and Olmsted County about what our plan is as we approach these deadlines. We are in, well, we're nearly in November, where we will begin launching some listening sessions. Several of those will be in conjunction with the county because many people are, obviously if you live in Rochester, you're an Olmsted County resident, so you'll probably have some feedback on both of those things. So we will be doing a lot of joint work with Olmsted County as this process evolves. So that starts out here in a week, and we will continue in December looking at adopting redistricting principles. Now, those principles and or policy will be coming forward for the first time at the November 15th study session for the council. So stay tuned for that. I'll put a date reminder in the chat box as well, so you can tune in for that conversation as we look at adopting some redistricting principles. So we would look to adopt those officially at council in December. And then again, working with the county to summarize themes that we've heard from several of these listening sessions. And that schedule, it will be coming out very soon, by the way, as well. I don't have the details here, but stay tuned to our website for more information. So February is one of these, is the big deadline in Minnesota. Technically in state law, the legislature must adopt their maps by February 15th. Now, what has happened over the last 4 decades is they have failed to do so, and the judicial branch has been the one who's been drawing the maps in Minnesota. So that is another interesting process. Paul mentioned We haven't, codified a lot of these principles, and the law is kind of vague. And in part, it's because the judicial branch continues to be the one who is drawing all of these maps. So we will wait until we get the maps from the state. Like I said, there's this February 15th deadline. If the state legislature doesn't meet that, then we wait for the judicial branch to give us maps, which they would likely do pretty shortly thereafter. We would expect by hopefully early March to have those. And then the city has to start drawing those maps right away because they are due at the end of March on the 29th. So we do wards and precincts. We'll redraw those lines at that time. And then it turns over to the county, and then they can finally start their process to redraw the commissioner districts. So first of all, what is a precinct? So this is really the most basic geographic area that is used for elections. It is very much administrative by nature because ballots are really created at that precinct level. And you know this from watching election night returns. Reports or results are reported at the precinct level as well. And then again, frequently political parties utilize precinct information for organizing and outreach efforts. And then I just have, so this is a little map of Rochester, and I have this you can barely see these tiny numbers, but these are all different precincts in Rochester. And then wards, as Paul mentioned earlier, are what you are electing your city council members from. Now, Rochester is one of only about 70 cities in the state that elect members to council via wards. So that is an interesting little tidbit. And you'll see, we have 7 members of council, but we only have 6 wards. So that is outlined in charter. The 7th member of council is elected at large and serves as the council president. And then again, you've probably heard a little bit of this already about the Rochester, Minnesota by the numbers. So the new number we got from the census for Rochester population was 121,395 residents. That's about 13.5% increase from 2010. And if you take that number and divide it by 6, that creates what our ideal size would be for a ward in Rochester. So that is 20,233 members. And then just, a quick overview about some of the requirements that we will be following as we consider these maps is they need to be equal in size. They must essentially follow the 14th, 15th Amendments and the Voting Rights Act. At the state level, there are principles about being convenient and contiguous. So that means they need to be touching essentially, and then they also need to be compact. And then Rochester Charter requirements outlines that there must be 6 wards, they must be compact contiguous territory, and shall contain as nearly as practicable an equal population. And wherever possible, ward boundary lines shall follow the center lines of streets, avenues, alleys, and boulevards, and shall run due east and west and north and south. So here we go. This is the ward map blown up a little bit larger, and this is also outlining that, I know this is small text, what the percent growth was by ward. So Ward 1 and 3 had the most amount of growth, very close, 24.7% and 24.1% respectively. So we're talking about the southern part of Rochester here and then the northwest corner. And then I'm just going to go through the maps a little bit closer for everyone to see. This is Rochester Ward 1, and the council member is Patrick Keene. I saw him in the audience. The population by 2020 is 22,017 members, so that's a growth of 24.7%. The second ward is council member Mark Bransford. The population is about 19,328 and a growth of 7.8%. Ward 3 is Councilmember Nick Campion. The population 22,051, and that's a growth of 24.1%. And then Ward 4, Councilmember Kelly Wright Kirkpatrick, population of 19,224. That's a growth of 8.2%. Ward 5, Councilmember Sean Palmer, population of 19,779 with a growth of 11.5%. Ward 6, Councilmember Molly Dennis, population 18,983, growth of 5.9%. And we are back at this timeline. So again, we really do, I'm going to go back for a second and talk about the wards and precincts. We start with redrawing those ward lines. So I'm going to go back a couple to the big ward map. And this is just for instance, Ward 1 had quite a bit of growth, and they are about 2,000 members over that ideal ward size. So you can imagine some options to redraw lines would be to shift, this border south. And where your feedback is important is, okay, what neighborhoods are here? Is there a community of interest we really need to focus on keeping together as we adjust these lines? So that's feedback that we want to get from the public on these items. So we start with the ward lines, and then from there we do the precincts within the wards. The precincts, again, because it isn't, it's an administrative function. It doesn't have a requirement for equal size, but we generally try to keep it around 1,500 to 2,000 people. And so we will do that following getting those ward lines established. And I think that's everything I have. Happy to take your questions at the end. And I know my friend Ben will cover a bunch of stuff as well.
Thank you, Heather, for that excellent presentation. I pick up a little something each time I listen. And now we are going to turn to Ben Griffith, and he will discuss the census effects on county commissioner districts, townships, and small cities. Ben.
Okay.
Ben Griffith. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. My name is Ben Griffith, and I'm the Olmsted County Planning Director. The county's, I can't even talk. I'm so sorry. The county's Geographic Information System, or GIS division, is part of the planning department. So planning and GIS staff members have worked on redistricting since the 1990 census. So county staff have been meeting with city staff to discuss the redistricting process for the past few months, and have been working together to provide consistent messaging on redistricting to members of the public. The logos seen on this page have been created to help with that messaging. The larger logo in the middle of the slide is to be used for joint communications, and the two smaller logos at the bottom of the slide by Olmsted County and the city of Rochester. Some of this communication has already begun. Olmsted County's communication team has produced a What is Redistricting video, which will be released in November. And city and county staff members are working together to provide consistent messaging on the redistricting process. And both have established websites devoted to the redistricting process as seen on this slide. And I'll have it again later on another slide. Olmsted County has also created an Arcgis Hub site for redistricting, which I'll show a little later in this presentation and take it for a little test drive. Okay, I hope my slides are advancing. I can't see them since I'm presenting, so
They are
kind of blind. Okay, thank you. This slide is probably one of the most important ones that I have this evening, and it's the same exact one that Heather showed earlier, and it's the redistricting timeline with dates provided by the Minnesota Secretary of State's office, which provides guidance to all jurisdictions throughout the state on the redistricting process. While these steps are not the only ones involved in the entire redistricting process, there are a few that are specific to Olmsted County. February 15th, 2022 is the deadline for legislative redistricting, and Heather spoke about that, as did Paul. March 29th is the deadline for municipal redistricting. April 26th is the deadline for county redistricting. The filing deadline for the county's redistricting plans is May 3rd, so just a couple of days between that April 26th date. May 17th is the opening date for candidates filing for the fall elections. There's a couple of things I need to point out to everyone about this timeline. First of all, counties go last in the redistricting process after the legislative districts are completed and after the municipalities have completed their district boundaries and their election precinct boundaries have been established as well. Counties have to follow these lines once they're established before they can even begin the process of updating the county commissioner district boundaries. What happens is this: as the redistricting process moves forward, the time allowed to complete tasks grows shorter and shorter. Municipalities have about 42 calendar days to complete their tasks, while the counties have 28 days to complete theirs, which includes holding public hearings. That leaves approximately 21 days before the candidate filing period opens. I point out these dates to show that there's very little time to accomplish these tasks, and I'll circle back to this timeline a little later in the presentation to talk about it a little bit more. The next several slides I have this evening include some maps and tables with a lot of numbers. The first map shows the first map shows the percent changes in population for the cities located within Olmsted County. All of them grew except Chatfield, and several grew by double digits. This slide shows a table with the city's population totals from 2020 and 2010 census counts and the changes in population and percentages. I should point out that the population counts for Chatfield and Pine Island include only the population residing within Olmsted County. As you can see, both of those cities are split. This next slide shows the 18 townships located within Olmsted County along with their percentage changes. The cities are shown on this map for reference. This slide shows a table with the township's population counts from the 2020 and 2010 census counts and the changes in population and percentages as well. I should point out that the population counts for the townships do not include any city residents, just those living outside the cities within each township. I apologize that these numbers are a bit small in order to fit them onto the table and onto the slide, but this slide presentation has been provided to the League of Women Voters and hopefully can be viewed more closely at a later time. This slide shows the current Olmsted County Commissioner districts, and I have a few more slides following to provide a little more detail. This slide shows the current Olmsted County Commissioner districts with population changes for each district. As expected, all 7 county commissioner districts saw increases in population, and 4 of the 7 had double-digit increases. This slide shows a table with the population counts from the 2020 and 2010 census counts, changes in population, and the percentages. These are total population numbers, unlike the previous 2 tables I showed, which excluded some population counts depending on the jurisdictional type. The table on this slide not only shows totals as the previous tables did, but also has a line at the very bottom of the table with averages. These averages provide us with a guide for 2 things. First, the targeted population size for each of the new county commissioner districts, which is 23,264. And second, the percentages of changes in population in each current district ranging from 3% to 23.4% for an average of 13%. The percentages are important because according to state statute, no district can vary by more than 10% from the average of all the districts. Let me repeat that, from the average of all the districts, unless doing so would cause a precinct split. After redistricting, every county commissioner must run in the next general election unless that commissioner's district has a change in population of less than 5% from the average of all districts. Changes of 5% or more from the average of all districts would require a midterm run. The next few slides focus on each of the 7 Olmsted County Commissioner districts, like this one for District 1, showing a population increase of 621 residents for a 3% increase from 2010 to 2020. The next slide shows District 2 with a population increase of 1,629 residents for a 7.8% increase. This slide shows District 3 with a population increase of 1,683 residents for an 8.1% increase. This slide shows District 4 with a population increase of 3,939 residents for an increase of 18.6%. This next slide shows District 5 with a population increase of 4,677 residents for a 23.4% increase from 2010 to 2020. This slide shows District 6 with a population increase of 2,353 residents for an 11.1% increase from 2010 to 2020. And last, we have District 7 with a population increase of 3,697 residents for an 18.6% increase from 2010 to 2020. This is Commissioner Tynes' district, and I believe he's on the meeting tonight. So circling back to this table for the Olmsted County Commissioner districts, it's difficult to make predictions about how the new commissioner districts are going to look, or how much population will be included in each one, or whether any or all of them will even require a mid-year election. It could very well be that once all the other legislative and municipal districts and precincts are established, that the way the lines are laid out, there could be a couple of newly drawn county commissioner districts that may not exceed the 5% increase. We just won't know until all the other redistricting boundary work has been completed, which won't be until the end of March, according to the redistricting timeline. And here we are back at the timeline. In order to emphasize this again, there are a great many unknowns at the present time about redistricting in general, and redistricting for county commissioner districts in particular, because of the many steps that are needed to take place and to be completed before the county's redistricting can even begin. So let's take a quick peek at the Arcgis Hub that was created by Olmsted County GIS staff. This slide shows a quick shot of what the homepage looks like, and we will attempt to open this. So everybody hold your breath, and we'll take a little test drive. Okay, this is the homepage as you would see it on the website. There's some basic information, including the 2010 and 2020 population information, the timeline as I scroll down here. There's the population, here's the timeline. And there's some links further down to some additional information about redistricting. Let me scroll back up here. There's 4 tabs here at the top. What is redistricting? The redistricting timeline, the current district maps, and community input. Hang on a second. The first tab is what is redistricting, and this provides some background and some information and some references on the redistricting and the redistricting process for cities, townships, as well as for counties. Redistricting timeline, we have the graphic that you've already seen, and there's one with a little more detail, and this one's more focused on the Olmsted County redistricting process. Current district maps. Now, we could probably spend about half the night going through this, and I'll come back to it, and you can come back to it and look at some various things, but whoops, I'm already messing up here. So if you scroll down just a wee bit, you'll see there's 5 buttons. Let me line this up so we can look at this. So the first one is for the state legislative districts, and I zoomed out, should have zoomed the other way. Then we have one for the Olmsted County Commissioner districts. Let me see if I can line this up a little better. I'm hoping y'all can see this. Then we have the school districts and polling places. It takes a second to download here. Then we have the townships and the small cities. Again, it takes a little time to reload. I hope y'all can see these. And there's one for the city of Rochester. Let that download for a second. And then there's another one. This last button has got all of the data that we just talked about, and it's a little busy. It's a little busy and a little hard to navigate. So let's go to the commissioner districts, and we'll do a little bit of navigating here. So as you see here, you have the map, you have the plus and minus buttons here where you can zoom in or zoom out, or if you put your cursor on the map somewhere and use your scrolling wheel on your mouse, you can do the same thing. If you'd like to know, for instance, where you live, or you want to know where, what district you're located in, there's an address here. And what I'll do is I'll enter in the address for 2122 Campus Drive, which is out at the Olmsted County campus. And this is the shows the building where the planning office is located, as well as the elections office. So you can see it shows, it puts that dot on the map and gives you the address there, and you can see where it's located. So we've looked at those three, and there's a whole lot of information on here, and someone can spend a lot of time on the maps and going through and looking at different things. The last button here is the community input button. Let me give that time to download. On this site is where we'll have events, and like tonight we have tonight's League of Women Voters event on here, and other events will be posted here as they become available. Scroll down just a little bit. There's an interactive map, and I'll come back to that. Oh, well, let me do that here. Comment on that. Let that download. It prints out a map, and you can make comments on this. It takes a little bit to download, but you can see how it works. It's very intuitive. You really can't mess it up. It's, if you do get confused, you can back up and exit, or exit out of that frame and come back. So it's real intuitive and easy to work with. Let me back up a little bit. We'll go down just a little more. We have some public comment sections where people can make comments, give input. Have another map. You can put a pin on the map and make more comments. And if you scroll down, we have some survey questions and some other information as well. You just see it's very, like I said, very easy to use. It's very intuitive. Our GIS folks are really good at providing information for anyone and everyone to easily navigate and use. And there's a lot of information here. You could spend hours reading all the material and following up on the references. So it's a really good way, as we have found, to put a lot of information, make a lot of information available to the public, and receive input. Okay, let me get back to my slides here. Here we go. There we go. Okay, here we go. So what's next? Whoops. Olmsted County will soon be releasing a short video, as I stated earlier, that provides a general overview of the redistricting process, and printed maps and information on redistricting called toolkits will also be provided to members of the public at various locations, such as the public library. Listening sessions are being planned but have not yet been scheduled. Olmsted County plans to utilize this Arcgis Hub site as an easy-to-use interactive tool to provide information and updates to the public, as well to collect comments and feedback, especially when we begin updating and preparing the new county commissioner district boundary maps. And lastly, at the bottom of this slide is just another reminder that the timeline and processes for redistricting begins with the state, followed by the cities, and then the counties, the schools, and the townships. With that, I'll conclude my presentation, and I'll be glad to try to answer any questions the moderators may have from the viewers. Although it may be a little too early in the process to be able to provide any answers, especially from the county at this point. I have the Olmsted County and City of Rochester redistricting websites available on this page for reference, and I'd like to say thank you to the League of Women Voters for inviting us to present and share this information with everyone this evening.
Thanks, Ben. I just want to let people know that we've included the link for the website you just showed us, or the page on the website, the Olmsted County website that you just showed us. So thank you for that.
Great,
and,
thank you.
I have a quick question. I should have listened more carefully, but GIS, what does GIS stand for? GIS,
I said at the very beginning, is Geographic Information Systems.
Okay.
So it's a mapping and data analysis tool.
And then a quick question, will, where people put the information in, will they get any kind of feedback? Like Yep.
The way that this is set up, it collects all the data so that we can look at it and analyze it. And if someone asks a question at some point, we can respond back.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you
Yes,
for
ma'am.
that. Excellent. And thank you for the great website so people can navigate that and get information in those maps and such like that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now I'm going to go, and that was Ben Griffith from Olmsted County. And now I'm going to turn it back to Paul Huffman from League of Women Voters, who's been working tirelessly on redistricting and has been a great assistance to us down here. So Paul, I think you're going to connect the state and the local redistricting for a recap.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. And what I'm going to talk about is how you as individuals, as residents, can engage in our suggestions, given all the wealth of information that both Heather and Ben have provided. Where do you start? And how do you connect with that process? And what are some key things to think about as you do this? And I do appreciate the effort that's gone into the county creating the website and the information. That's really a big advantage and a benefit to the public. Over the last 10 years, the interest in redistricting has gone up dramatically across the country and in local areas. So that's very helpful. Just a rehash of the timeline. What's happening right now this fall through January, the city and county governments are deciding on a local process. They're training their staff, they're assembling data, they're defining process and schedule. You've heard a lot of that. They may be scheduling hearings and they may be drafting maps. I can tell you that I know for a fact that our city's already drafting maps in Minnesota. They can't finalize them till after the legislative maps are final because you have to verify your precinct boundaries. But there can be work done, and there is being work done in various places to at least start drawing maps or doing some trial mapping based on what is known and what the public comments are. So those are some things to be looking for and anticipating and to pursue with local government. February 15th, as was said, that is the date when the legislative boundaries are going to be issued and congressional boundaries by the court. That's the point at which the city and county government will know for a fact what the boundaries are going to be and can review their precinct boundaries. For those precincts that are within the broader districts, they probably won't have to change. Townships, I know some townships, they are a single precinct, unlikely to change. So there's some things that we can anticipate, but we won't know with certainty until that comes out. Then the final redistricting hearings happen in February through April, where the city and the county both finalize their maps. So that's the timeline. So coming back, why is local redistricting important? And this is where I'm going to kind of toot the horn of the county and the city a little bit about why do they matter? What do they do? There is a lot that happens that affects the day-to-day lives of residents in Olmsted County and the city of Rochester that is based on policy decisions and resource decisions made by the city council and the county commissioners. County commissioners, I was in a meeting recently and somebody said that they consider county commissions the forgotten level of government. Frequently, residents will go to their city council and say, well, I want this or that issue addressed, or I don't like this or that decision. And the city council or the mayor will say, well, that's something you really need to talk to the county about. So you think about transit, transportation, medical, mental, and public health services, social services, public safety, infrastructure. Most of that comes from the county. A lot of that comes from the city. A lot of implementation decisions come from the city, how things are going to get done, where they're going to get done. So those are both very important. They both have a lot of bearing on what happens on a day-to-day basis for residents' lives. Local government, you're more likely to be able to contact and engage those local government officials. As was said, I think Heather said that the average ward size in Rochester is about 20,000 people. So that's a manageable size where you're likely to be able to connect with and know who your city council member is. And the last thing is you're more likely to be able to influence local government for public involvement. So when you're talking state representatives, they're one of 134 people. They've got 45,000 people they're accountable to. It's hard to get that level of engagement and accountability. Locally, it's a lot easier. The other thing I'll mention, and it's not on this list, is local redistricting is important because that's where the opportunities for people to initially get into public office occur. So when lines are drawn in a way that provides opportunities for people of potentially underrepresented communities to be represented, that is a real benefit. If those lines are drawn in such a way that doesn't provide that opportunity, that reduces the opportunity for people new to government, new to the community, to become part of that process. Some challenges that may exist with local redistricting, and this is throughout the state. Remember, we've got 87 counties in Minnesota, so there's a lot of differences. Most local governments aren't accustomed to public involvement and interest in redistricting. This is something, especially locally, that's been pretty off the radar in the past. It's something that just happens and then it gets done and people move on. There's a lot more interest, and be frank, the League of Women Voters has been encouraging that interest because of how important that local representation is to the day-to-day lives of the residents. So, people may not be familiar with that. Some local government officials we've seen are resistant to public involvement and transparency. I'm not going to say that's the case here because we're hearing really great things from both the city of Rochester and Olmsted County, but there are counties where we've gotten different feedback. And so that can provide a challenge. There are very limited requirements for what has to be considered in local redistricting. So the minimum standard being pretty low, it may be difficult to get maps drawn that represent what the public interest is or what the public would like to see. And then you have to engage your local government to get information. So this is the purpose of the League of Women Voters, is to reach out and just, it's just fantastic that both the city and the county have done that and providing these structures. And that's something that's really helpful to folks. And that's a great thing. And then to influence the process, if you want to make a change or influence a change, you need to engage now. And as we said, that the process, I think Ben mentioned that they've been talking for several months on how they're going to approach this. So once these processes get finalized, it's very difficult to change them. If you think that there ought to be something getting done that isn't currently in the plan that the local government's talked about, it's going to be time to reach out to your county commissioner or your city council member. A couple of maps that I think is key to think about. And this is just a little bit different look from what Heather and Ben presented. From the county, what I'm showing you is how those populations differ from the ideal commissioner district size. What that shows you is those three out county districts, being 5, 7, and 4 are over, and 3 of the 4 urban commissioner districts, 1, 2, and 3 are under the ideal populations. In practice, what that means is those 1, 2, and 3 are going to have to get bigger. The ones that have more people than they ideally would are going to get smaller. So that being districts 4, 5, and 7 are going to have to get smaller. Now, what I think is interesting as I look at this is that all 7 commissioner districts have part of the city of Rochester. And so that 2 of those wards, 2 of those commissioner districts with the largest numbers of people over the ideal are also the 2 wards in the city of Rochester with the greatest growth. So something to look at and consider. And this just gives you tabulars similar to what Ben provided for the county. I think it's, looking at by district, how far they differ from what the average needs to be for 2020 tells you where the changes need to be. And what I think it's also important to recognize is demographically, the city of Rochester, and we see that in a lot of counties outside the metro with larger cities, is that the city has much different demographics and therefore probably different policy interests than the greater county area. So in Rochester, it's almost 3/4 of the population of Olmsted County is 28% non-white population by the census. Greater Olmsted County is only 9% non-white. So demographics isn't everything, but it is something. With the city, I really appreciate the detail from the city on this. Again, looking at the differences in population, and you see that Ward 1 and Ward 3, the highest number over what those ideal are. Those two wards have to get smaller. And those wards in the inner part of the city are going to have to get bigger in order to equalize population. It gives you some idea of how those district lines need to change. You can't finalize that until after the legislative maps are drawn, but it does give you a chance to think about, how would I want that to change in the next set of maps. So given that background on the timeline and the process and where the maps are, what are some suggestions on approach local redistricting? And the first thing is focus on the process. Without having a process that provides opportunity for input, involvement, feedback from the public that's responsive to the public, then you really, nothing else is really going to be productive. And this is the first step of this, and this is part of what the league has done, is ask, how is it going to be done? Because until we ask, we don't know. And so, again, graciously, Heather and Ben have provided that information. Ask local elected officials for opportunities for public involvement where they don't already exist. Comments on draft maps, comments on final maps, and then really adequate time between when those comments are submitted and when the final answers are provided. In the meantime, we suggest reviewing existing maps, researching local census data, and draw community maps. The census data, and we've got some handy tools that we provided to the league, and they're available on our website. And I'll put a link in the chat for our local redistricting action kit to give you kind of a little roadmap on how to engage in local redistricting. What are some tools and information that might be helpful to you doing that? But thinking about how you might draw the maps or what your community is that would benefit from different representation, or maybe being mapped in the same district you are today. But it's a matter of stepping back and asking what would help you the most. Strongly encourage attending public hearings and providing comments. That's how elected officials know you care. If nobody shows up and if nobody's providing comments, elected officials are going to think that anything they do is going to be fine. They will be responsive to public input. And the last thing I'll say is partner with other organizations. Together, we know more than each of us does alone. And together, community groups can have a more effective voice in influencing those outcomes. So just to strongly advocate, partnering with other organizations, build off one another's core strengths and experience in order to be effective in this. Some things to remember as you engage with local government, with the staffs. Remember, redistricting is only done once every 10 years. It's likely a part-time job for folks. They may have limited experience. And so, don't assume they know what you know or know as much as you do. They know a lot about what they do, but they may not know everything, and they may not be working on this full time, depending on who they are. Staffs are going to focus on legal requirements and past practice as a starting point. So just understand and acknowledge that's what they're going to focus on. And then policies are unlikely to change without elected official approval. So once the staff tell you this is how we're going to do it, if you think there should be something else considered, you're likely going to need to talk to your city council member or your county commissioner to influence that change. Elected officials, they may not know the details. They're relying on the staff for those details. So you may need to help them with that detail or what your concern is. They may not be familiar with the term community of interest, and I didn't hear that mentioned that I heard, but communities of interest are really a key concept to define where people with shared economic, social, cultural interests live, and then identify how to get them into a shared district where they have the greatest of opportunity to influence policy and decision making. And then finally, with all of these, then present facts on process and availability of data. So just be factual and be polite and persistent. And that's the thing I tell everybody. It doesn't benefit anybody by being contentious or argumentative. Listen, understand people have other things they're doing. And so come back and revisit questions or comments if you're not getting the feedback that you had expected. Some tips for providing effective comments. Again, this comes from the Brennan Center. They have a document based on analysis of 2010 redistricting cycle nationwide. Make sure your comments are actionable. It's something that they can do and act on. That, for example, you're not defining a group or population so large that can't be contained within a single either city council district or commissioner district. That it's legal, it's contiguous, it's relatively compact. That's one of the issues for commissioner districts. Think small. The smaller the area you define, the easier it is for the people making the decisions to accommodate that comment. Define your community. Talk about its need for representation. I talked about that. There's lots more we could talk about with this, but define your community. Create maps, which we can help you with. Be prepared for limited time to speak, only a few minutes if you're speaking, and then those neighborhood coalitions. So that's a lot, and we can obviously provide more help. League of Women Voters Rochester has been very active in this and has a lot of ability to help, as do I from the League of Women Voters Minnesota. So Anna, thank you very much for your time, and I'm open for questions.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And thanks for tying together the local and the state there. And now we're going to move on to questions. And the presentation portion of the evening has concluded, and we will move to the questions. If you choose to leave now, we thank you for attending. Please remember to submit your questions through the Q&A box in the chat. And if you have not done so already, we will try to answer as many questions as we can, and we are going to ask the questions from our co-sponsors intermixed with the audience questions. So thank you. So as Paul was talking about process, focus on process first. I'm going to go there with the process question. And one of the goals of League of Women Voters is to encourage local folks to participate in government. So the first question that we have is from the Diversity Council, and their question is, authentic community engagement requires more than seeking feedback on solutions that have already been designed. How can the public be involved in each step of the process? And I think what I'm asking you to do too is tell me what specific steps you'll be asking for input. I can think that there's like the initial and then when the maps are drawn, but what other steps will you be asking for involvement from the public? And how will they find out about that? Now, I believe, or Ben, we put the Olmsted County link into our chat, and I'm not sure if we have the specific web page for the city, but if you have that, Heather, you can add that after. I think it's on our website also, our League of Women Voters website. So I'm going to start with Heather first to identify the steps, how people find out about it and how they participate. So
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much. That's a great question. Authentic engagement is extremely important. And I will be as specific as I can. So as I mentioned, we will be bringing forward a redistricting policy principles to council. It'll be in the study session on November 15th. So that won't have a public comment period. But when we bring it forward in December for adoption, there will be public comment, and we plan to have listening sessions between then and bringing it forward in December, where we would want community input on the policy. And then another piece here too is we are going to be advertising via social media and through our website. There's been some discussion about postcards, mailers going out, kind of akin to things that went out with the census, because this process really is a continuation of what the census does. So I know we had sent some communication out about that when the census was happening. And then, so stay tuned about the policy. There will likely be some information in there about engaging with the public in that policy specific. So then we would go through and hopefully be able to run with that as we get started with the map drawing in February of next year. So there will be public input on that process as well. Ben showed the awesome counties Arcgis website, and we will have a similar one that will launch along with our digital toolkits, which will be another way to engage and provide feedback on those maps. The communities of interest are super important to us. So we do want to know where those communities are lying and what we need to consider. So that will be an important piece. There will be that survey that Ben mentioned that is in the toolkit as well, and it'll be online. Yeah, so I think those are our main steps.
Can you describe to me what a listening session, how you perceive that being like? Will it be online, or people coming to an event, or a lot of different ways to do that?
There will be some virtual attendance options as well as in-person options. So at least that's the plan right now. We'll obviously follow any guidance that we get from the state and county on that. And then they will be specific to wards in the city, and then all of Rochester as well. So we'll have probably one session that'll have Ward 1 and 2 together, and we'll invite everyone to that, but it'll be a little bit more focused. And we'll present information, but very much be available to answer questions and take feedback from the public.
Okay. And Ben, I'll turn it over to you to ask the question about, or answer the question about feedback and the steps along the way.
Well, what we have found in the past with other projects where we've involving public engagement is these interactive tools like the Hub site have been really effective in giving us very specific and very detailed information. Where I showed where you can put a pin on a map and you can write comments about those or make general comments. And when we collect those and start, when we collect those and analyze those comments, we can start putting together areas of concern, areas that we need to address, and how we follow up. And a lot of communities of interest need to be engaged in different ways. And when COVID has really turned that upside down, on the one hand, it's turned it upside down, but on the other hand, it's also opened up a lot of other venues like this interactive tool. As we have found in the last year and a half, it's been very effective. And a couple of years back, we were lucky to receive a dozen comments, and then with these interactive tools, it goes from a dozen or a couple of dozen to a couple of hundred or 1,000. And so it's been very effective. And so we really have found that that's an effective way to begin that engagement process, and from that, how that engagement is going to take place and what direction it's going to go in. And again, we're the last. We're the I told someone the other day, we're the caboose in the train. So we're kind of the very last to be able to do anything. So we do a lot of listening and paying attention at the front end and as it goes through, and that's where those comments that we see, and our guess is we'll see those comments evolve that we're receiving as comments are made probably about the legislative and the municipal redistricting process. So those are all things that kind of feed into that in that process and how we go from there.
Okay, thank you. And a lot of math and a lot of short timeline too.
Yes, ma'am.
Down to the county. So next question, and this comes from another co-sponsor on NAACP. How do you plan to develop a redistricting plan that avoids diluting the influence of racial and ethnic minorities in the city of Rochester and Olmsted County. So Ben, I'm going to start with you first, since I started with Heather first last time. Go ahead, and if you have any questions about the question, let me know.
Well, again, being last, we have to kind of work with the framework that's been established prior to. And Paul touched on it and made a really good point that, when you get into the more urbanized area, it's, there's a lot more diversity. When you get out into the more, non-urbanized or the rural areas, it's not. So it makes it a lot tougher when you have to take all that into consideration. And that's where that close data analysis comes in, and where you really have to look closely at where those lines are drawn and how they're drawn with, again, with the framework that's been set, it's been established ahead of you. So.
Okay, and Heather, I'll
Thank
have
you.
you answer the question from NAACP.
Yeah, so this will be really important. We are still waiting for some level of detail from the census that they'll be releasing at the end of November. That gets down to I'm going to get this unit wrong, the tract level information, the census tract level. So that will have more demographic information in it. So we're waiting with bated breath for that, so that we can see that in the map. So we will likely have, we call them heat maps that kind of display pockets of demographic information, I guess you could say. So it's not, the New York Times, for example, does some great graphics with heat maps about, they've done a lot in COVID, but they do it for various topics. So we'll probably utilize the data in that way to take a close look at where those communities are throughout Rochester. We know there's some in like the central northern part of downtown is historically underrepresented. So that will be area that we pay very close attention to.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So now there's a question from the Rochester Public Library. How can another co-sponsor, how can the redistricting process best protect the underrepresented to ensure equity in our political process? And the underrepresented might be ones that are not digitally have digital native, kind of like my kids versus me. And how will you be reaching them? Because I agree, some of these online are great and you get more input, but there are the underrepresented that may not be out there reaching out to you. And we'll start with Heather this time.
Sure, thank you. Well, thank you. I'm working closely with my friends at the library. So this toolkit that we plan to have, that there will be the digital version, but we will also have a physical version that will be available for pickup at the library, and then with other community partners as well. And that will include all of the information that, as much as we can physically print, that is on our website. So it'll have individual maps for each ward. It'll have a blank map provided, so somebody can draw their lines or highlight to us if they want to write on the current ward map and circle a neighborhood for us and give us input. That will be the information that we're looking for in that space. So we are starting to make that digital piece available in analog format, if you will, and available for pickup at the library. And it doesn't have to be returned. So it's kind of like you're checking it out, but you can just take it home with you. And then there will be places for you to return that information to us, because we do want your feedback. That is the point. We want your feedback, but you don't have to check it back in.
Thank you. And then about reaching the underrepresented and maybe, not internet savvy people.
Well, definitely, like Heather said, the public library is always a key partner in any engagement and outreach efforts. And there's a long history of working with the library, and they're great partners to work with. And they do have the computer terminals at the library, but they also are a good point to pick up, those printed materials that folks can take and read at their leisure, that they can mark up and return, and that feedback is every bit as important as what we collect, from our electronic comments and our electronic, our digital comments that we receive. And we analyze all of those and we look at all of that, and those face-to-face, opportunities that we have to meet with folks are always good. Again, with COVID, it's really limited them in the last year and a half. But now with things looking like, they're kind of loosening up, there's those opportunities are kind of opening up again to be able to do that. Rochester's usually got all kind of activities that are going on now. As we get into the winter time, they kind of curtail a little bit, but there's usually opportunities to piggyback on to be able to reach the communities and talk to folks, and we try to do that strategically where we can try to reach either targeted groups or the widest cross section that we can to get comment and feedback.
Okay, thank you. And I have a couple more from co-sponsors, and then we'll get to some questions from the audience. A question from IMAA. One of the most important questions on the minds of new Americans is, what will the local government do to address reasonable language and cultural access to education about redistricting processes? And what, if any, actual outreach will they do to limited English proficiency, LEP, populations? And I will start with Ben this time, and this is from the IMAA.
Sure, and they're a great resource in the community, and I know we've worked with them in the past on other projects, and they're a fantastic source. They really did a lot of work during the census count, and were very active with the complete count committee that worked to get all the residents counted with the census count. And the types of materials that would be the most beneficial, and we'll work with our communications team as to what types of materials and how those languages, if anything that needs to be translated. We've done that in the past. We've tried to target that, and rather than doing it carte blanche, we try to target and figure out what is needed rather than just assuming what is needed. And again, IMAA has been very helpful in the past with that, and we've reached out over the years with the planning department doing outreach and engagement. We've established a network of folks that we can contact and talk to and try to figure out what are some of those avenues and what are the best ways to work through those processes. And we'll be doing the same thing with redistricting as well.
I think the census taking that was, you involved those local community organizations. Yeah.
Heavily, very heavily. And the library. The library was another key partner with that.
And I think we had a good result in our census here because
we sure did.
Yeah. And Heather, I'll let you address that also.
Certainly, thank you. Yes, we are looking to get our materials translated, interpreted. I know we've spoken about Spanish and Somali for the Rochester area, but again, open to other language feedback if that is required in another way. And interpretation is important here too, because the translation sometimes is difficult because these are very new principles in some cases that we would be introducing.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to get an audience question in here, and then we'll ask one from the League of Women Voters. So, and this is going back to principles. How do you define a community of interest? And Heather, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Sure, thank you. Interestingly, the state it's not defined in Minnesota at the state level, and it has been debated a lot lately at the state level. So if you guys have been following the House redistricting committees, those have been fascinating. I just sit there and eat my popcorn and listen because it's amazing. And I know the judicial branch is doing a hearing on principles, but it'll include communities of interest. And that is next week. I think November 4th is that first hearing that they're having on those principles. So I'm a little bit waiting to see if we get some definition from the state on what that is. But really, in my eyes, I see the communities of interest as being potentially demographic communities, racial or ethnic communities of interest, neighborhood communities, but not necessarily, and this is where the conversation has come up quite a bit. It's not necessarily political affiliation as a community of interest. It's something other than that. There's been a lot of conversation about Indigenous communities of interest in greater Minnesota, for example. So yeah, that definition is still kind of hanging out there, and we'll kind of see what comes down.
And thank you. And Ben, do you want to share what your understanding or what the county is thinking of?
Sure, and this is where you're planning, this is where the planning department really has a big interest in this. And your communities of interest are both your racial and ethnic. They're also your socioeconomic. There's also your geographic. Age is another one of those. So all of those and how all that feeds in, and all those, those special interests, folks that have particular interests, and I don't want to say political, but the different interests that folks have, and all of those and how they all work in that mix together is how we would look at those. And again, that goes back to a little bit of what I was saying was how do you engage them? How do you reach out to them? What is the best way to engage them? What tools do they prefer? Younger folks like to do things online, and our more senior folks like to do things face to face or on paper. So it's runs the whole gamut of how you communicate. But all those communities of interest are the areas that we try to look at and how we address them.
Thank you, Ben. And Paul, did you want to add anything to community of interest?
Yes, Anna, thank you. What I wanted to offer, a couple of things based on what Heather and Ben said. One is, I would not expect anything from a state level on how to define community of interest. There are some kind of generic definitions, and I'm trying to think. The National Council of State Legislatures has done this. There's some other nonpartisan groups have done it. The House and the Senate have been talking different definitions. And so I think it's going to be something, and of course we have an opinion, but I think it's something that it can be done in a fairly generic way. The other thing, I think it's best for the community themselves to define who they are and who their community is. And because again, I think we can look at demographics, we can look at data, and this is the kind of thing I talk to redistricting experts about is, you can sit in a room with a computer and a bunch of data and draw a map, but unless you talk to people and ask them what's important to them and who they are and what their community, you're not going to get who they are and what their community is and how to make sure they're effectively represented. So I think a lot of good things, but that's just a little perspective I'd add.
Thank you for that input. I was muted. Now I'm going to go to a question. League of Women Voters has this question, and I think this will be more directed toward Olmsted County, and then there'll be a question for city later. The city of Rochester is currently developing a set of redistricting principles. Will the county also be developing a set of redistricting principles? I think that's November 15th. They're going to have the city council meeting, and then listening sessions, and then in December they're going to present them, and then public comment. Is the county thinking of doing anything similar to that with the principles of redistricting?
I'm not aware of that. Generally and historically, what the county has done is they have used the guidance that's been provided through the state statutes and through the Secretary of State's office that comes out every 10 years following the census, and follow that. And I'm not aware of any intent to do so at this time. Again,
Okay.
the county goes last, so kind of hard when you're the caboose and not the locomotive.
That's why you have time to set them up. But thank you, Ben. Heather, can you comment on the redistricting principles? And then maybe I'll get some input from Paul about principles and how they have been used in other counties, cities. So go ahead, Heather.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, that's essentially what we're doing, is looking at what our peers are doing around the state as well. The thought initially has been to model it somewhat on the redistricting principles that the state adopts or will look to adopt, and they prioritize those as well. So we're kind of looking at that, and then looking at what like Minneapolis has and St. Paul. They both have kind of a charter commission option. So we're evaluating those and taking a look to see what would be best for Rochester.
Okay. And when do those come out from the state again?
No, those are
Well,
oh, the redistricting principles.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, those the House looks like they're close to possibly adopting some, but the judicial branch will have them by the end of December.
Yep. Okay. And Paul, did you want to comment on redistricting principles? Or if not, that's fine.
Yeah, I think it's similar to the definition of community of interest. Both chambers have looking at different principles, and so if something's approved by the House, it'll probably not happen until the beginning of the legislative session. The committee approved something, but it was really along partisan lines. So we don't think there will be a state set of principles. I am aware of one county that has already approved draft principles. So those are things that are moving forward in other places, kind of like Heather said.
Okay, thank you. And now this question is also from, I think, the league, and this is more directed toward Heather. Will the city be considering, and I've heard talk about this, I think at council meetings, will the city be considering adding precincts to lessen the number of registered voters per precincts? I guess I've heard of Met forums, city council forums. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, we likely would, being that we like to keep those around 1,500, and the council districts have all grown. So we would likely be adding to each ward.
Would that, so I mean the number of, I think the question is
Precincts, the number of precincts.
Oh yeah, we'll be considering adding precincts. Oh, I know, I know that this come up at county or city council forums about adding a number of wards, but this was about precincts. Okay.
Yeah, a ward change would require a charter change.
A charter
so
change.
that is not being considered at this time.
Okay, thank you. So another question is, the city charter has rules about changes in council districts. Oh, and that's with the charter. That's must be with the charter. Yep. Okay. I should read ahead. And so I think that, oh, I know. I think just reiterate how the city and county will publicize and recruit for the listening sessions in November and other, because those are coming up fairly soon. So those will be on social media, you said, and what else?
Yeah, lots of ways. Ben, can you help me out a little here?
Well, I would, I know our communication folks are working together on that. They're trying to do things, jointly and collaboratively. Social media is always a good one. Do a press release. It's amazing how many people say they don't watch the news or read the paper, but it's amazing how many people hear of things through the news and the newspaper at the same time. So, those traditional ways are always good. There's so many ways to do that, and again, we both, the city and the county, have very capable communication teams that are really good, that we rely on to get that word out, and we kind of leave it to them because that's their specialty, and they do such a good job of it. And with the two entities, communication teams working together, there's a synergy there that seems to work really well.
Thank you. I know, and I'm glad to hear that the city and county are working together. And also I've seen a couple of the videos that the county has done, and they were really well done, short, sweet, and very informative. So I appreciate that. And Heather, you look like you wanted to add something, or?
Yeah, I was thinking of the press release was the thing that I couldn't think of that was like at the tip of my tongue. But also we would share the information with you to share with your members as well to get out there.
Okay, thank you. And sorry, I know sometimes I look distracted, but I'm trying to find the questions. And I think one more question, and then I think I'm never averse to ending early, a little on the early side. 8:30 is our hard stop. Could you repeat the guidelines for when commissioners or council members would or would not be required to run for re-election? That comes from the audience.
And I'll just start real quick. That is only applicable in this case for the commissioners. Rochester's wards terms are staggered, so there isn't a threshold that would require that.
Okay, thank you. That's kind of was my understanding, but thanks for repeating that. So we are coming up on 8:30, so I think that I will go ahead and end the question part of this. And I want to thank you for answering all those questions that we had this evening. And I want to thank Paul Huffman, Heather Heyer, and Ben Griffith for co-sponsors for participating in tonight's event. Thank you for your service to the community and your work specifically on local redistricting. For more information on local redistricting at the city and county, as well as the LWV local and state, please check out the links in the chat box and our website. LWV Rochester invites you to our winter general membership meeting, which is open to the public. The program for the event is Know Your Parks, an update on Rochester's Parks Master Plan with Paul Widman, Director of Parks and Rec. It'll be November 18th at 7 p.m. on Zoom, kind of like this event. While there, you can join or renew your membership at LWV Rochester by clicking on the join link. And I want to thank our speakers again. I appreciate the information. I keep learning a little bit each time, and I sometimes have to keep asking the same question until I get it. But thank you very much for your participation tonight. I can't get that word. And thank you and have a good evening.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
And thanks, Paul. Bye-bye.